morning. So we managed to get Ubuntu working with screens. That's impressive. It's always really hard. So today I'll be talking about some of the approaches you can take with modularity for building front-end apps. These approaches are agnostic from like your particular choice of package manager. Guy has done a great ton of work with JSPM. These techniques are going to work just fine with any good package manager. And in fact, his voxel demo was great. It showed exactly what to do, have a huge tree, and have like 120 kilobytes of JavaScript at the minimum. That's definitely like the way to go. So a little about me. I'm Renos. I've done a lot of stuff in Node and in the browser with NPM. Sometimes I think I have a little bit of an addiction to open source. I've written at least like 100 modules targeted at the browser, and this approach has been working great for me. So we'll go over a bit of an overview of the things I'll be talking about. So the first thing is like, how do you get started with modules? How do you use them? Guy pretty much covered this already, so we'll just blaze through that. The second part is, what does it mean to offer small modules, and what are the benefits of like offering these small or these micro modules instead of offering like big libraries or larger things? We'll take a look at a similar example to what Guy showed, which is just, you can embed things with CSS and assets and like self-contained, and it'll just work. And then we'll talk a bit about how you can build your own flexible framework for modules. And I'll talk more about what I mean by framework later. Cool. So some of the tools of the trade that I'll be discussing and that I've used, you don't need these. You need anything that's equivalent. Let's get a bit of a quizzing and questions going. Who's here? Well, everybody's already heard of NPM because it was mentioned. Who's here's used NPM before? That's a good number. What about Browserify? Who here's heard too much about Unix philosophy and how great it is? Okay, cool. So, quick recap. NPM's place to put JavaScript. Now, one of the really cool things about NPM is it's so easy to publish. You go and write some code, and you hit NPM publish. It's done. No waiting, no gatekeepers, no nothing. The other thing that's really nice is avoiding dependency hell. NPM has managed to get the nested dependencies to work such that you don't run into version conflicts. Which is kind of important because as you start doing modular things, you're going to have multiple things at different versions. And you don't want to have to think about conflicts or worry about that. You want it to just work. Browserify, you can write CommonJS, it bundles it into one file, and everything just works. It's great. Now, one of the things I do recommend checking out is this Browserify handbook Substack wrote over last week. So it's like Substack's Browserify handbook, and he's written like pages and pages and pages and pages about really, there's too much there. It's too much. Yeah. And the last thing I mentioned is that a lot of my inspiration comes from some of the Unix philosophies. This one is the quote about modularity. And to sum it up, it suggests that you should use small things and connect them together. And one of the biggest things it says is, the part that's really important here is like this part here. As you start using small things, they can be replaced. You're going to run into, oh shit, that was a mistake. I shouldn't have used that thing was terrible. The other thing is, I have a bad habit of feeling like I want to be able to maintain and read all my dependencies, because I have a feeling that those authors are going to get hit by buses, or they're just going to abandon stuff on GitHub, that happens so much. If something is small, it is a lot easier to be able to be comfortable that no matter what happens, I can continue working with this. It also helps if it's not written in CoffeeScript, but that's just a personal thing for me. Okay, cool. So when using modules, why? So one of the big things that I love about this approach is I get to just pick the best of everything. Like, I don't have to make a compromise. I don't have to pick a large thing and go like, well, I like 80%. I just won't touch the other 20%. I don't have to deal with that. I get to really also drive my architecture and my design of my application around what I want it to be, rather than what some of the tools I pick off the shelf are telling me to do. You use exactly what you need, no more. So that's lower on kilobytes in theory. Sometimes doesn't work out in practice. And lower on complexity. So just knowing that you don't have these really large things in your dependency tree, you don't have to worry about them. You don't have to worry about upgrading them. Whenever I used some of these big libraries, or whenever a new major version came around, I had to spend a couple of days updating my app. With these small modules, the scope of what you have to deal with is way smaller, and you can upgrade them more easily. And obviously, freedom. Like, freedom to switch whenever you find something that works better for your application. Whenever I build an application, I don't know what it's going to be. Like, I have an idea in my head of how it's going to work, but it's always wrong. I need to have the freedom to be able to adapt and move as I start to understand my application better. So modules are great, but they're hard to find. Like, when you start out, you don't know where they are, you don't know which ones to use, which ones are good, which ones are not good. And honestly, one of the best approaches to figuring out what the good modules are is you go and talk to somebody. Like, you talk to them on ISC, you talk to them on Twitter, you talk to them at a conference. Failing that, NPM search does wonders. I'm going to try and use NPM search later and see whether it actually gives me what I want. I hope it does. And then the last part is there's a whole bunch of these groupings and collections on GitHub and other websites where people have gone and like thrown small modules together in like one bucket. It's basically like a list. It's like a wiki page. And these actually work wonders. And you can kind of see what's worked for other people. So, some other people claim that if you're going to like build stuff with WebGL, like all these things do good stuff. I don't know anything on WebGL, but if I wanted to try and start there, I'd basically go there. And in fact, when you think about it, looking at one of those things is like talking to the person who wrote it. That person's like telling you what the good things are. And there's a whole bunch more like examples. There's a whole voxel, level DB, and streams community of people making lists of modules. And this is where I write code. Yay. Okay, so let's actually get started and show what it looks like. No, not this one. Show what it looks like to write code with open two shells. Yeah, show what it looks like to write code with these modules. So go in here, we'll create a new little file. Yay. So the first thing I have here is I have a HTML file for my little demo that just has some CSS, because CSS is, I don't want to talk about how to manage CSS, that's difficult. It has, and a bundle. So it has the bundle we're going to load, so we're going to have to create a bundle. And we'll start here with building our thing. So I want to go and build a little piece of DOM, and I'm not going to do it by hand. So I'm going to try and search for a module that allows me to create a new DOM element. And then hopefully, NPM comes back with useful results. All right, and there's a module called new element in the list that hopefully does what I want. So I open docs for it by using the npm docs command, and go over to the browser and it's like create new elements, put some HTML in it, and some like templating. Fantastic, that's exactly what I wanted. So I want div box, put some text in it, close the div, some text in it, hello JSConf. So we just require the module at the top, yada, yada, yada. It works great. And then we want to grab the container. So again, I would search for stuff, but I'm going to skip that step because NPM search is a bit slow. We're going to grab the container by ID. Grab by ID. And then we need to append stuff. So we'll grab a thing to append stuff. And we'll append box to container, and the box, and works just great. So one of the first things you might ask yourself is, OK, cool, I could have done this with jQuery. This is really not that hard. If you use larger libraries, for example, jQuery here, you're going to be stuck with the interface they have. You're going to be stuck with whatever design decisions they've made in their interface and the features they support out of the box. Now, appending is trivial. You don't really need stuff for that. By ID goes directly to document.get element by ID, which is significantly faster than querying with like a hash container. And this new element thing, it kind of looks like how you would build elements with jQuery, except it has string interpolation built into it. And I don't know about you guys, but I don't like concatenating strings manually when I can use string interpolation. So by picking these small modules, I have the freedom to use a nicer API. I have the freedom to like say, actually, the API, this other big thing gave me the box is not good enough. I just want to go and like pick a different one. And if there's a bug in this guy, I'll just like throw it away and use a different module because there's another 5 to do exactly that. So we'll go here. We'll Browserify demos, spin it to out into demos, bundle, and then we'll open demos in the spinner HTML. Yeah. So that failed horribly because reasons. Oh yeah, I know why. I made the text color white in the CSS because that's a great idea, white and white, right? So that's finished writing the rest of the code here. So this demo is just going to be a little circle that spins around. So to do this animation, I'm going to use a request animation frame loop, increment this counter, render the box in like the new location for the animation, and then loop again. Loop again. Cool. So for request animation frame, obviously there's a module for that. There's a module for everything you might possibly want. And this is an example where, like, if we had used jQuery, jQuery doesn't really have a way of doing request animation frame out of the box. So you're going to need to have either your own code or a module for that anyway. And I'm too lazy to write render, so I'm going to copy and paste it out of here. This one uses yet another module for setting style properties. Because I don't want to remember the differences between what the DOM does and what the HTML does. That's well, what the DOM does and what CSS does. That's a pain in the ass. And now if we bundle this again, go over here and refresh this. Clearly you've seen that I've hard-coded. Oh, you can't see anything. Clearly you've seen that I've hard-coded the styling for this thing to not fit more than 10 characters. But other than that, it looks great. So that's kind of an example of the workflow. You go and search for what you want, you pick the small things you want, it works great. Now, however, for me personally, I don't want to work at that kind of granularity all the time. That granularity is fine if I want to do anything performance sensitive, but I've had enough of touching the DOM. So let's step back a bit and talk about some of the advantages of offering small modules. If you offer a small thing, in theory, hopefully, people are going to be able to reuse it and expand upon it and collaborate with you. I've actually run into multiple situations in the past where I've built like a medium-sized thing, and I've tried to collaborate with people, and they said, that thing's too big, I don't want to touch it. Like, I've personally seen the way to put it is that people don't want to collaborate on things that aren't just the absolute minimum subset they want to collaborate on. They want to be able to. It's a lot easier to work with people if you're as unopinionated as possible. If you're trying to write like one small thing that does one thing well, people can work with you on that. If you put that thing into a larger thing, you're going to start adding baggage, you're going to start adding opinion to it, and people don't want to work with you on that anymore. I wrote a module called XHR. It's really boring. It sends HTTP requests. I wrote it because IE9 does coarse really terribly, and I couldn't find anything else that could do that. Now, one of the cool things about this is that other people have built stuff on top of it. Somebody built this library called HTTPify, and it basically takes Mikhail's request on the server and XHR on the client, and then gives it the same interface, so you can use the same code on both sides. He also added a couple of features I forgot in XHR, like form encoding. Another guy built a little thing on top of my thing for doing JSON by default out of the box, and also adding promise support. So my XHR module is just driven by a normal callback. Because it's driven by a normal callback, it's pretty easy to add promise support on top. Doing the inverse is a bit harder. So like, he's able to not have to duplicate my code just to add promises. He can just add a thing on top. And then obviously there's other like people using your stuff. If you write an XHR module, the internet sucks. Okay. Someone's written a JavaScript client for a flat sheet surface. And rather than using XML HTTP request directly, he used one of my modules. So the idea here is that if you can write small things, people can use them, people can collaborate on that, and people can build on top of it. And as you get more when people build on top of a shared basis, everybody wins. Like it's code reuse. Everybody's happy. So the next concept I'm going to talk about is building a modular framework. And when I say framework here, I want to like have a quick aside on separating the implementation of a front-end framework from the concept, the philosophy, and the ideologies. A lot of those times, those two pieces are put together into one package. The most important thing about a framework, and the thing that's really hard, and you should avoid doing this at all costs, even though I'm doing it myself and I'm a terrible person, is to not write your own philosophy, to not write your own top-level concept of how to build applications, how to structure them together, and how to make them gel. However, once you've taken some of these concepts, let's say for example, we take React's Flux concept, or we take Elm's FRP concept. It is possible to have multiple implementations of a concept. So with React's Flux, it's all about having unidirectional flow from a user input to like managing a state to rendering. That's a great concept. However, it shouldn't need to be coupled to any implementation detail. And people can differ slightly on their choices of implementation for that. So the advantage of differing on the implementation is that everybody can agree on like the top-level concepts and how to structure the application, how things fit together, but they can disagree on whether they should use promises or callbacks internally, or they can disagree on whether you should structure things in an OOP fashion or an FP fashion. Like the top-level design shouldn't be coupled to that. So if we want to build our own implementation of one of these concepts, ideally we can take a whole bunch of modules together and have them work well. And once we do that, it means that the next guy that comes along and has slightly different ideas can go and reuse half those modules. He doesn't have to go and rewrite everything, which seems to be really common in the front-end world. Well, JavaScript in general. We're terrible at rewriting everything. And I had this personally. I tried to use a subset of React myself, specifically that virtual DOM implementation, and I could not figure out where it was in the implementation. I spent a lot of time looking at React source code, and I couldn't make head or day out of it. So I wish that would have been written modular from the ground up. I wish React was already modular, so I didn't have to go and... Like, I feel like a terrible person every single time I solve an already solved problem. So, going back to this slide, the biggest thing about making sure that the tooling and the framework you use is modular is to decompose your problem space, to decompose what you want to build into reusable pieces, and then to work from the ground up. And the most important part, actually, is to make sure every single piece you write is useful on its own. It has to actually be a thing other people want to use. If you just take your big thing and spread it out into 5 smaller things, but each individual thing doesn't make any sense at all without the others, then it means other people can't use it. It means other people can't build on top of it. And that's the thing we want. We want people to be able to build on top of each other and to share code. Yeah. So as an example of how I went through and tried to do this approach myself, I wanted to implement something that had a unidirectional philosophy behind it. I didn't invent this philosophy myself. I didn't I didn't wake up one morning and decide this is how we're going to do stuff. I spent a lot of time reading React, Elm literature about how this approach should work. And this is kind of important. Whenever you're going to grab together modules, ideally you want to build on top of what other people have done before. Now, the part that sucks is I couldn't find small modules that did what I wanted. And when I did find some, I had to re-implement them for really small implementation details, which kind of sucked. But that's OK, because I can use the things I want to use, and other people can use the other ones. It's OK to have different implementations. It's OK to have different trade-offs. When I went and decomposed my solution, I wanted to just build a representation of my state where I can be notified of changes, and I needed it to be immutable for performance reasons. So I built a thing for being notified of changes, something that's observable, and then I built an immutable object and an immutable array module. And I had a strong focus on making sure each one of these was useful on its own, and I separated them out to try and reduce complexity. Apparently, implementing an immutable array is really, really hard, and that was really complex. However, the other two were a lot simpler, so I'm happy with the outcome of isolating complexity in the complex module and breaking out some simpler modules. I needed a way to represent input. Thankfully, I'd written some modules a year ago out of frustration with other stuff I was doing, and I could reuse half of them. I wrote a module for handling reading of user input out of the DOM. So whenever a user interaction happens, I just want to be able to say, like, when the submit action happens, give me all the state in this form. And I wrote this module so that it would work with the DOM interface. It just returns you an event listener. You can just element, add event listener, the thing, and it works great standalone. And I'm really happy with being able to build something that actually works standalone. So in theory, other people can go and use it. We also had to implement some stuff for the rendering side. I tried really hard to use React's implementation, but it was pretty tightly coupled. One of the things I wanted with the rendering of my view was to be able to say, here's the state of my application, and here's what it should look like. So it's the exact same philosophy behind React's virtual DOM. You just want to say what it would look like. So I built a module for representing the virtual tree. I built a module for doing all the DOM manipulation, which was pain in the ass. And then I built a separate one for just some syntax sugar. Because creating a tree by hand without something equivalent of JSX is a bit verbose. Now, the interesting part here is these pieces come together to build a unidirectional style application. But every single one of these pieces is an implementation detail. None of them are actually important to be able to build the application with the philosophy you want, with the architecture you want. Which means if you don't agree about the implementation details, that's okay. We can still agree about the architecture. We can still agree about how you build applications. And you should build alternatives. Like, it's really healthy to have alternatives. If we don't have competition, we're never going to build the best thing. We need competition for performance reasons. So one of the things I mentioned earlier was you could publish UI components as modules. And it's possible to just zoom. It's possible to just publish some kind of widget with your implementation details of choice to your package manager choice and to be able to use it. So this is going to render a little widget, document body, append child, and it's going to show somebody's GitHub name. Does somebody want to give me a name on GitHub? Lat.js? Okay, I will pick my name because nobody shouted loud enough. So, as an aside, require bonus is a really cool tool for playing around with NPM. You can just write common.js and write NPM-style stuff, and you click rebuild, and it works. So, on the right, you can see the defined assets, right? We've included some widget over the internet. We had the one-line install. We had the one-line require. It comes with all the CSS and the icons and the blah, 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 blah. The important thing here is you can publish all of this to NPM and it will just work. And also, this widget at the implementation detail uses my framework and all of the stuff I personally like, and I export a DOM-based interface so other people can use it, and that will work quite cleanly. So the last demo I wanted to show was building one of these unidirectional apps with modules. And in fact, the important part of the demo I wanted to show, because I'm really low on time, was that whatever you use is an implementation detail. So the important thing about a unidirectional, let's actually show what this looks like. Browserify, demo, to list. Pipe it into index, modify. So I have a little demo for an app. It's really stupid. You write some text, and you write some stuff, and you add a thing, and it works. Cool. So the way I represented this was I wanted to say what user input is, like this add event. I wanted to say what the state was, which in this particular case is some text up here and a list of things. And then I wanted to handle user interaction. All in addition, let's push a new thing into the array. And then rendering. Like I have some rendering code, which if you squint really, really hard, it looks just like Jade. And you can pretend it's not, you can pretend it doesn't have braces. It's really not that bad. Render a list. For each one of the item, we render a thing, and we render a form over here. Really not that exciting. But the interesting thing here is, if I don't like the implementation detail of what I choose for the state, I can just get rid of it. And I can swap out for a better module. It turns out there was a bug in it, or like I just don't like Renos in his code, and I want to replace it with Backbone. So you can implement an app with the same philosophy and different modules. So we want, nope, not that. We want, okay, I'm just going to cheat a bit more. We want this stuff. So here, all I'm doing is I'm refactoring my code to use Backbone models and Backbone collections. And I have another model for the application state. It has the exact same description and array of events, and I set it up over here. And then I'm not even going to bother running that one, but I will run the other one. That, and nope, that won't work. This will work. And let's open that. So this one is the exact same implementation, the exact same rendering logic, yada, 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 yada. And it's using Backbone at the model layer. So one of the kind of important parts of using modules, and the thing that we really want, is to be able to swap out an entire subsection of our application with different implementation. And this will be really difficult to achieve if you're using some kind of tightly coupled MVC framework. And I believe that's all I have time for. Thank you.